Okay, hi folks, it's Hayden McCall speaking, and welcome to Cloud as a Platform for Growth. Thank you very much for joining us today. I am very pleased to introduce today Brendan Connolly from Accenture in Australia, and Simon Peterson from Financial Force, also based in Sydney. Unfortunately, sharing the news that Tony arrived off a flight into Sydney this morning in a rather state of disrepair, and will not be joining us today. So we had a good session with him yesterday. We can talk a little bit about IntegraPay and how they're using the cloud for their business, but we'll push on regardless. So we have 12 questions to get through today. These are assigned to each of the guys, with obviously some gaps now because Tony's missing, but we'll get through them as we can. Now, just before we push into it, the session's being recorded. That'll be emailed out to you tomorrow. And also keen to have questions raised. We're aiming to have a little bit of time left at the end if I stop talking and get on with it. But as we go, if you can load it into the Q&A page, just click on the Q&A button in your panel at the bottom there. Fire away. I'll keep an eye on those, and we can either address them as we go or at the end if we have time. If there's anything specific in there, we'll come back to you after the session. All right, so we'll get into it. Defining cloud terms. Every cloud conversation needs to have a start off with a definition of what we're talking about. So who had this one? I better just get to the right sheet here. Brendan, you were going to lead off with this one.
That's me. Good afternoon, all. Really delighted to be part of the conversation today, and I do love a good acronym. So before I delve into the defining what these mean, let me just set the scene a little bit. For those of you today listening who are as old as I am, you'll have no doubt got fond memories of sizing and installing and managing infrastructure to support your business systems, and days of standing in freezing cold server rooms, loading and configuring software on servers. So I'm really thrilled that those days are past, and cloud computing is really...
Oh, hang on, Brendan. I'm sorry. I've somehow not... My apologies, folks. We started off with a false start. I didn't hit the broadcast button. So let's just back up that truck and introduce. Sorry about that, everyone. So back to the top. I'm Hayden McCall, and I am fat-fingered and fumbling today. Welcome you to the webinar Cloud as a Platform for Growth. Let me just check that I'm not also fat-fingered in terms of recording. I am recording. Very good. Happy to introduce you today, Brendan Connolly from Accenture in Australia, based in Sydney, and Simon Peterson, Financial Force Managing Director based in Sydney. Unfortunately, Tony was on a flight from Sydney this morning, arrived in a very bad state of repair, so is not going to join us today. We had a good session with him yesterday, so we're going to talk to how IntegraPay is really leveraging the cloud environment. I won't go through their bios, you've already seen those, but we have got 12 questions to get through today. The session's being recorded, so you'll get an email with that after the session. Actually, we'll send it through tomorrow. And also want to encourage you to fire in questions as we go. The Q&A pane, just click on the button and type away as we go. I'll keep an eye on them, and we'll either address them as we talk through each question, or if there's time at the end and I stop talking, then we'll have time to do that. Okay, so Brendan, to take the first one, and like all good cloud conversations, we need to define what we're talking about. Brendan, over to you to restart your introduction.
Great, thanks Hayden, and really delighted folks to be part of the conversation today. I won't go straight into the acronyms. If I may, I'll just set the scene a little bit and remind people of what life was like back 20 years ago in the IT industry. And for those of you who are as old as I am, you'll I'm sure have fond memories of sizing, installing and managing large infrastructure in really freezing cold server rooms. So I've done many of those in my time, and I'm delighted to be part of this cloud computing era where those days are over, and we're really seeing the benefits of cloud computing, starting with that infrastructure as a service idea, where businesses are able to adopt a whole new approach of provisioning storage space and processing capability for their business applications and data, and serviced by the likes of Azure, AWS, Google, and IBM. So really, that's what infrastructure as a service is about for me. When I think about software as a service, it's really a maturing concept that Mark Benioff is credited with creating, and it's all about delivering a service or a capability over the internet rather than through, again, a software application that you own and maintain and support. So when you think of the likes of Gmail and those G Suite applications that a lot of businesses use, and also from a CRM perspective, the obvious example is Salesforce. In the HCM space, we have Workday and so on. So this is all about using software over the internet rather than managing and maintaining your own software packages on premise. In between those two, we have the platforms. So the platform players are all about providing a canvas to allow customers develop, run, manage applications without the complexity of building and maintaining the infrastructure. And typically that means a better, faster, cheaper experience for application development. Businesses get to have the benefits of the features of the platforms like security and authentication, the native database capability and integration standards and so forth. So you have players in the platform as a service market like Force.com, CloudBees, and even Google and AWS. So what's interesting about the definitions, I tend not to get too hung up on them, but there's a lot of names pop up in each sector. There's a lot of gray areas and boundaries that are expanding as players like Google play in all three of those spaces, AWS likewise. So we're starting to see that expansion occur in these areas, similar to the way, the big four of Facebook, Apple, Amazon, and Google are encroaching on each other's B2C business models as well.
All right, good stuff. I guess cloud hosting as infrastructure as a service is a term that a lot of people use, and often when people start talking about cloud, they get stumbled over the cloud hosting part of it. I guess we're moving significantly beyond that. So software as a service, get that browser-based, just application, running a single application. This whole platform idea is probably still in the future for a lot of companies to see what's going on, and hence today's session around giving a bit of education around that. All right, so to add to that, Simon, do you want to just drill into that a little bit of some examples of cloud platform and how they work, in practical terms? What's a customer sitting on a platform going to enjoy that they're not otherwise going to enjoy?
Sure, thanks Hayden, and I guess thank you to everybody for joining today. I'm absolutely delighted to be here, and I guess to pivot a little bit off what Brendan was going into there around cloud platforms, I think it's an interesting one, and I too have been in this industry for a fairly long time, and I do remember those cold server rooms. With a passion, actually, it was the good old days. But I think as we move forward, for me, a cloud platform, I'm really focused on business outcomes from enabling a business process context. You see three examples here. Obviously, we talk about the Force.com platform. SAP has a platform. Oracle has a platform. AWS, etc., etc. There are a lot of examples out there. Workday, AWS, etc. I think if I hone in on the business side of this, a true cloud platform really provides an infrastructure for an organization to leverage applications in a far more democratic way than was traditionally the case. I think if you go back sort of 15 years or so, maybe 20 years, take an SAP on-premise environment. They were the dominant player at the time. You would spend a fair bit of time and effort building out your IT infrastructure. In that case, it was an on-premise infrastructure, but you're effectively beholden to the applications provided by the vendor. And when you are looking to integrate your full business processes across your business environment, you had to really either focus on let's say the SAP platform in this instance, and buy all your applications from a single vendor, or go through a usually fairly expensive exercise of integrating different pieces of the puzzle. If you move forwards into a cloud platform, for me, one of the more fundamental pieces of that from a business context is you have, and I'm going to speak a little bit technically here, but you effectively have one database, and that's for any IT department, for any business to operate effectively. You need a single source of the truth. So in the example of let's say Force.com platform, which is Salesforce's platform, you have a single customer record, you have a single view of your suppliers, etc. It doesn't matter which business application you load onto that platform, whether it be something that Salesforce provides, something Financial Force provides, or any number of other applications on Salesforce platform. You can be confident that application leverages the same data set. So quite often I'll be talking to customers or organizations out there that talk about a single source of the truth, but when you peel the layers back, they've got 2 or 3 versions of their customer master record, and that fundamentally creates an expensive environment, and it also creates, I guess, a less than perfect client experience. So for our customers dealing with their customers, they expect, when they're dealing with these organizations, the person they're talking to on the phone to know exactly what interactions have happened with their service department, their sales department, with finance, collections, etc. They expect that as part of the client experience. And you simply can't do that if you're not sitting on a single cohesive platform. I think the other part about a cloud platform that's critically important. I think this is probably a real issue in terms of organizations taking their first move to the cloud. They're very used to having that server room sitting in the basement that's usually under lock and key, and they're very used to the comfort feeling that all their data is inside their own building. And I think the leap of faith, I think, in the early days of cloud was very much around security and trust. And I think for the most part that's been addressed by the big players, certainly from a Force.com, from an AWS, etc. Security and trust are 2 fundamentally important things to get yourself across before you make that leap to the cloud, especially from an enterprise software perspective. You need to be of a mind that putting your data into the cloud, it's secure, safe. You're not allowing any of that, the corporate IP you have to potentially be in any way, shape or form under any security threat. And that's absolutely fundamental to the value proposition of a cloud platform. I think, look, from another piece of that puzzle is the ability to innovate on a cloud platform is far more rapid. So, for example, you may choose to go with a certain software suite on a platform, and over time your business changes, you innovate, you have new lines of business, you have new strategic areas that you're focusing your organization on. You actually need to be able to pivot and add new applications to your stack on that same platform. And I think you need to be pretty insistent that you have the same user interface, the same logon, the same underlying database for whatever application you add to your environment. And that, of course, leads to lower total cost of ownership, and from a training and an adoption perspective for the organization, it just means that you're iteratively adding capability and innovation as your own organization innovates.
So, Simon, is that that single database across the whole platform? Is that something, Force.com obviously has that capability? That same concept is across all of the platforms. So that's a common element. Multiple applications, single database.
Yeah, look, I think the way to describe that is platforms that were born in the cloud tend to have that as part of their architecture. But I think there are obviously a number of players out there that were certainly around well before cloud architecture was invented, and they are obviously scrambling now to migrate their suite to the platform. In some cases, that involves a rewrite. In other cases, they're porting existing capability onto the platform. I think in some instances, the realization of that and the need to get software to market has left some platforms with still multiple versions of the truth. But I think if you asked any executive at any of those organizations, where is the end game in terms of building that cloud platform, they are looking to get to that single spot. And I think Force.com, as you mentioned, has an advantage that it was built around cloud from the very get-go. So there was no re-architecting necessary. And in this case, the customer was at the center of everything. And I think that's really important when we're talking to senior leaders at organizations. Every single organization we go into, somewhere in their slide deck, they have a customer as at the center of our business strategy perspective. And if you don't have an infrastructure that supports that, you're effectively kidding yourself in terms of getting customer service and customer focused business working if your infrastructure is potentially having 2 or 3 versions of that customer record.
All right. Good stuff. Okay, let's press on quickly, because this next one is IntegraPay, and Tony, if you've just joined, is unwell and won't be joining us today. We did talk to him. So IntegraPay is an interesting one. It's a good example, and the reason he was involved today was he's got a decade-old business that essentially has built and grown up in the cloud. So he's kind of architected the business, both front office and back office, on a cloud platform, like literally using everything to do with the cloud platform. So single sort of customer record, absolutely vital, because his customers are logging in and literally seeing the systems that his back office are using to process transactions. So yeah, look, I think it'd be better talking from him directly. Simon, you probably know a little bit more, so add anything more to that if you want to. Yeah.
Certainly. Look, I think it's interesting. So IntegraPay is effectively a payment gateway and a payment provider, and really what they are is a cloud software business. And I think the key point around building your business in the cloud and growing is the ability to innovate quickly. And I think one of the good example of that is they obviously provide payment gateway service to a lot of organizations, and they by definition integrate their cloud platform into a lot of different back ends. I think case in point, they saw an opportunity there. They're a customer of mine, but they're also built their business around Force.com as well. They needed to quickly innovate around how they would quickly and within the confines of a single platform, provide that integration from an accounting solution out to some of our clients, and they were actually able to build that integration within a matter of weeks, not months or years. And I think it's not so important that it's about Financial Force customer. The most important part there is it's an organization that's built on the cloud that can see an opportunity and innovate rapidly on their side to really build new markets and new business models.
Yeah. Brendan, just quickly, you mentioned in the lead-in where the Accenture path in terms of cloud. What are you saying?
Yeah, I think the point for me with respect to Accenture's journey to the cloud, and we are now 91% of all business applications in the cloud, but also Cloud Sherpas, who were that definition of born in the cloud business that Simon spoke about. The customer centricity of the business model is just as important as the benefits in operational cost and maintenance and so forth. So the thing that we're seeing is the cloud models and the cloud platforms are forcing us to change our business model to be more customer centric, which drives better efficiencies for us and drives better outcomes for our clients.
Okay, good stuff. We'll press on. So this one is yours, Brendan. Just talking about, so platform, fantastic, but we also hear about ecosystems around applications, and Salesforce is one, but Xero is another one that comes to mind. Lots of applications, and I suppose in the consumer space, everyone has the apps on their phone and goes into those stores and grabs what they want to have a play with, and there's definitely an app for that. just compare, I suppose, with traditional sort of ISVs and software development around your kind of core ERP solutions traditionally versus how things work today, and then I guess it's talking about what goes on in a platform space.
Sure, and I think when I think ecosystems, I tend to broaden the term to include technology partners, service partners, brand ambassadors, and anyone who can play a role in bringing the platform potential to life. So if you take the Force.com platform, for me, it is by definition the cornerstone of the ecosystem. It's the blank canvas that all the Salesforce Cloud offerings are built on, the Sales Service Cloud, etc. And all those architectural components and capabilities are offered to you as the customer, to ISV partners to build out the capability and to enhance that core offering. And that's very distinct to as compared to legacy cloud platforms. So when you implement Financial Force capability, for example, it looks and feels like the Salesforce UI. And in fact, it is the Salesforce UI that is extended to you, and it transacts in a similar and familiar fashion. And also in the ecosystem, say for Salesforce, there are 3,000 ISV partners. Xero has its own marketplace, and all these marketplaces are modeled on the App Store and Google Play. So businesses can build out capability to complement the core platform rather than customers having to customize or heavily configure their own instance. And that's very, very unique. So businesses like Accenture have built IP and industry solutions, and Financial Force and others, as we know, build out to round out that capability on the platform.
Yeah, good stuff. And a good question, Gary. What is ISV? Independent software vendor. So I guess it's an independent party that looks at a Salesforce and says, I've got a solution that can create an application integration point between Salesforce and something else, in a nutshell.
Yeah.
So yeah. Okay, yeah, good stuff. Okay, so next one up, and talking about customer success, you talk about the deck and sort of, the CEO's presentation, customer success and centricity around the customer. Simon, how does operating in a cloud environment kind of translate? And you've talked already a little bit about it, so just anything you haven't covered already.
Yeah, sure, no problem. Thanks, Hayden. Look, it's interesting. I was reading the Sydney Morning Herald last week, and there was an article in there that talked about the biggest, fastest growing jobs that you've never heard of. And really interesting, that article, obviously to a broader audience, not necessarily an IT audience, but the main role that they were talking about was customer success manager. And it's actually fascinating for me to read that, because I live and breathe this every day. I think, fundamentally, when you move your organization to a cloud environment, you are technically renting the software as a service, hence the acronym that Brendan was talking about before. And I think what's interesting is when you sign up to a service, that's fundamentally different to buying a piece of software and implementing it on premise, you're subscribing to a service, and your expectation is that service meets quality guidelines, it meets value objectives, it meets adoption objectives. And I think adoption for me is probably one of the clearest indicators of whether my software is providing value for an organization. And by adoption is of the user population that's supposed to be using that software, who's using it, how often are they using it. And I think part of the role to ensure success at our customers is really to ensure that the people that are using the software day in, day out are seeing value. And to be quite blunt, if organizations are not seeing value, they're not going to renew the software subscription. It's that simple. I think from a customer perspective, it's really turned the tables, because I think certainly in the 1990s and early 2000s, most organizations were fairly beholden to the software provider. You've made a massive investment both in hardware, software, training and technical skills. and getting out of that software if it's not working for you is a particularly expensive exercise. It's certainly been the end of a few CIO careers and CFO careers over the years. And I think the environment that we're working in right now is the power has certainly shifted. As a client of a cloud software provider, you can and should be demanding value from the investment you make. The flip side of that is you also need to continue to invest and innovate in how you're using that solution. So for me, customer success is fundamental. In our organization and most cloud software vendors, we have people with the role of customer success manager, and their role is not to sell. Their role is to manage the relationship, manage any escalations, and really be a conduit from the software provider into the customer to make damn sure that value is being achieved, people are getting a positive experience out of the software, and we continue to innovate. And I think that's one piece, but I think the other piece is most good cloud platforms are really a baseline for an organization to do their own innovation. And I think for successful cloud deployment, the IT departments need to be seen as innovation engines and not just keeping the lights on and running backups, which I think the cloud environment certainly enables. And I think they're the fundamentals.
Yeah, good stuff. Brendan, anything to add into that discussion?
Yeah, I think really what I saw, and we all saw in the early stages of cloud, was people just assuming that cloud deployment would automatically lead to success. So, not looking at the business model and revisiting that, but saying, hey, I'm going to rip out Siebel, I'm going to put Salesforce in, and all of a sudden my business will be customer centric. Well, it does take a little bit more than that. So as Simon mentioned, you have to challenge your business to think as the software is built and defined around the customer, and you have to challenge your business to be innovation focused. And I think they're very key attributes to getting the best out of cloud technology.
Brendan, I'll add one to that just very, very briefly. I have seen this before, and it's certainly a feature of the cloud environment that as a client renting software, there can sometimes be a tendency to say it's not my software, it's your software. And I think that the really important success factor in getting this right, it doesn't matter how the software is deployed in your business environment. As a client, you own the software from a getting value out of it perspective. Your vendor is there to help enable that, but the ownership of your infrastructure must be within the client organization from a strategy, a focus, and an innovation perspective.
Yeah, which changes its position somewhat, doesn't it? Kind of to be incumbent upon the management of the organisation to get value out of it as a facility. Really,
Yep.
Completely makes sense. All right, folks. Just thanks to Anthony. Good question. Some specifics there that I need to read it fully and just see. There might be some and come back directly one-on-one, but do keep on bringing the questions in, folks. We will have a bit of time at the end. 12 questions to get through, and number 6 sits with Brendan, talking about growth, and we're talking about cloud as a platform for growth, or cloud platforms as a platform. What are we talking about here? Talk about the journey that customers can take themselves on when they've got the flexibility that the cloud provides.
Yeah. Well, I think just touching on what we spoke about, the cloud technology has transformed and is dramatically different. But I think the ingredients to successfully deploying and scaling your applications across your business and driving value haven't changed. So whatever your size of business, the more thought you can apply to the 2 to 3 year horizon, the better. It's absolutely important to work through the idea of what we need now. Where's my business going to be in 5 years, and what will I need then? Where's the industry going? Where's the competition headed? Because I have seen a lot of businesses of all sizes taking very siloed and very short-term views around their cloud adoption strategy. And it is okay to dip your toe and try a minimum viable solution to prove it out, but you have to have that framework of how am I going to scale this? How am I going to integrate it properly into the business architecture and the business fabric? And the biggest trend I see now in terms of adopting and growing the footprint of cloud technology is businesses seem to be more willing to go all in on cloud platforms now. So dipping your toe and moving forward in an iterative fashion still exists, but we are seeing the all-in approach, particularly in the medium to large enterprise. So I think that there are a lot of businesses stuck on the, hey, I've got one cloud component and how do I scale? That's a common thread. But I think really the long run is about whatever your approach, understand what your roadmap is. What are you doing after your MVP? What are you doing after your first cloud deployment, and where are you taking things? So I don't think there's a typical transition. I think either approach is okay, but really unlocking the value of these innovation platforms is about knowing where you want to go and all the possibilities that are open to you both now and down the road.
Okay, good stuff. Simon?
Yeah, look, just I guess a point on that as well, and I think it may help address Anthony's question. I think one of the massive advantages of looking at a cloud platform is that they're typically multi-tenant environments, and an organization that builds applications on a cloud platform, again, if we use the Force.com as an example, that organization that builds that platform has to build business processes that innovate for large enterprise, that take into various business models across lots of different industries, and even in a lot of cases for small enterprises. And I think that the key point to make there is in that multi-tenant environment, what gets developed for the world's largest organizations in terms of sophistication can and quite quickly be adopted for very, very small organizations with a very minimal investment from those smaller organizations. You basically, because you're renting typically on a per user per month basis, you're getting access to exactly the same capability that's built out for the world's largest organizations. Now, by no means do I suggest for a second that a small business needs to adopt all of that capability, but it gets access to a lot more of it. And in a lot of cases, you would simply have to go out and buy a completely different software package as a small business, and you wouldn't get access to a lot of the innovation that these big software vendors can make because of their larger clients. So it effectively democratizes the access to pretty sophisticated capability. But as a small business, you can take small pieces of that capability.
And I think, Anthony, the message underneath that is, why are you worrying about a physical server? Worry about the functionality that your business needs, and ignore the physical server. Look at the application as opposed to running as you are on another server somewhere in the cloud. It's not going to make any difference. So yeah, move on from that kind of thinking. Sorry. Okay, local support, an issue that is a chunky one, and Tony was our guy to respond to this, having lived and breathed it for the last 10 years of building a cloud-based software business. But guys, you can talk to this. Do you lose local support when you go with the big cloud vendors, the global conglomerates and big software companies, or how do you navigate through that, and what are the issues that you confront? Brendan, do you want to lead off on that?
Yeah, I think there is a real concern around that, and it has been addressed in certain respects with the localization of particular vendors and teams in the ANZ marketplace. There are moves also to localize the data residency for certain cloud platforms too, with Australian data centers and so forth. It's something that I think you have to take on a case by case basis, and I really feel it should be getting back to the idea of an ecosystem and partnership model that's going to be right for your business. You have to factor this into your purchase decision, I feel, as part of how you feel you and your ecosystem can drive the right value for your business.
Simon.
Yeah, sure. Look, I think if you look across all of the cloud platforms, some have local support and some don't. And I think you need to, when you're selecting a platform, understand whether they do or they don't. And if they don't, understand what that means in terms of how you're supported. My personal preference is I think we're a parochial lot down here in ANZ. And I think it's incumbent upon large software vendors to recognise the Australian New Zealand market, and I think it's really, really important to have local support. I think fundamentally, when I'm talking to clients about support, they want to know that they can pick up the phone and talk to somebody. They don't really care what accent they have, but they really care about the time zone they're in and their expertise around Australian companies and Australian business processes. Not that we are fundamentally different in all respects, but I think we've got to do that. It's part of our commitment to, as an industry, it needs to be part of our commitment to the ANZ marketplace.
And I think, Hayden, the definition of support has broadened. I mean, the third point there is quite important for me, which is that cloud technology has grown up in an era of open source technology and crowdsourcing solutions, capability, answers to problems, and so forth. So the idea of traditional support is still important. The idea of trusting the crowd and really driving good dialogue through these user forums and communities is also a very, very important, integral part of modern day support.
Yeah, the massive communities that exist around some of these solutions, and you can pretty much find anyone that's got exactly the same problem that you're dealing with. It does take a bit of time navigating sometimes and validating the intelligence and language skills of the people who are involved in the forums, but that aside, there's a pretty strong environment around most of them, and it's a different way of operating than traditionally. You kind of go to your local partner and they solve all the problems for you. Well, no, you need to live and breathe this solution, and goes back to the earlier point. Your management and your whole culture needs to center around building value around your software capabilities. Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, with this one, next one we've probably covered, Simon. But anything that we haven't talked about, maybe we've talked about local data center hosting and so on. But a cloud replication point, the fact that your data ends up anyway scattered all around the world, if you want the redundancy that you do want.
Yeah, look, I think it's an interesting one. I'd say maybe 5-6 years ago, I'd encounter a fair few objections about moving to the cloud, and it doesn't. In a lot of cases, it's not really about where the data is. It's more, if you get to the root cause, it's about how secure the data is. And I think excuse me, to be honest with you, the conversations we're having right now are more around, okay, so I get that we're in a cloud environment. I get that data may or may not be residing in country, but give me some confidence in the trust I can have in you managing my data. Give me some confidence in the security that you have around it, and also give me some transparency. I think when you move to the cloud, it's what's the uptime of the servers. I don't want to be in the middle of a month end, for example, and get a nasty email from my supplier to say, sorry, your accounting system's going to be down for the next 2 days while I'm trying to close my books. So those are some of the things, I guess, that they're the root causes of some of the fears that we talk about. For the vast majority of the conversations I'm having right now, that's effectively a legacy conversation. I think we need to have the conversation around security and trust, but there are a number of niche elements in our market right now that still have some genuine sovereignty issues, and some of that is in government, although that's really dissipating. It's gone away probably in the last 3 or 4 years. I think the answer to that, obviously, in some circumstances, is I need a local data center, which pretty much every cloud vendor has these days. To your point about it doesn't matter whether the data center is in Australia or not, your data will end up around the world. I think as a prospective investment in cloud, you really need to understand what that looks like, and from a governance perspective, happy with it. I would suggest to you most cloud vendors have redundancy in country these days. I know the one I do does. If you're working with maybe a niche player and they say to you that they've got a local data center, your next question is, where is that data backed up to? and if it is backed up offshore, just be incredibly clear about how that works and the security and the trust that goes behind that. But I do think the vast majority have addressed that. I think, look, if you look at the real estate industry today, I think they're one of the holdouts. You still can't sign an electronic signature to buy a house, which I find archaic, but that's in the rules and it's industry specific. So if you are in that industry, I know that's in the process of changing, but that's absolutely a consideration, and you really need to bring it up as you're going through your evaluation of what the right cloud platform is for you.
All right, good stuff. Okay, so getting into some specifics around your systems of record and running ERP and CRM, and Anthony's got the example. So what's so different if you're running ERP locally, you've got CRM locally, okay, same thing happens. You've got ERP in the cloud, you've got CRM in the cloud. Why is it different? What can you do there that you can't if you're hosting it locally?
Yeah, I think.
Sorry, where was that one going to? That was a Brendan.
I'll kick that one off, and we'll see where it goes. I've spent 15 years of my career implementing ERP on premise, the traditional way, and the last 5 or 6 years looking after cloud, and everything is different for me. So the cloud is a game changer for businesses who are looking at moving from on-prem to cloud. The way you consume obviously is different. The way you pay for it is different. But what's interesting obviously is the support and the IT operating model that is necessary to support cloud too. So we've touched upon some of these, but the innovation mindset and the idea that you get 3 upgrades or 3 or 4 upgrades a year on cloud technologies is the closest thing to technology magic I have ever seen. Compare that to managing and upgrading legacy on-premise technology. It's just remarkable. So when clients ask me, what do I need to do to prepare for an upgrade on this cloud platform, I can confidently say, well, you go to bed on Friday, you wake up on Saturday, and it's done. So that's terrific. The innovation mindset we touched upon, you have to pivot your business to understanding the roadmap for the technology and the roadmap for your business. It's very difficult for businesses to keep up with a technology platform that introduces new capability and new features multiple times a year. And that role of technology is interesting, right? We've seen technology organizations go from support and maintenance organizations to an area of the business that can add strategic value and contribution to the direction the business is taking. It's absolutely fundamental. But I guess, getting down to the nitty-gritty, there are interesting conversations around data and data architecture and how do I manage my data in a cloud environment. So what is the system of record? What does the integration pattern look like? What happens if I take all my data to the cloud, and what happens, in fact, if I want to move my data from the cloud in years to come? So those are interesting questions that businesses are also grappling with.
Okay, Simon, I noticed, Brendan, you're conveniently missing out the big API piece in the middle. You've got the next question on that one, so you won't be wriggling for too much longer. Simon.
I'll leave APIs then. I think what's different. I think Brendan covered it pretty well. I mean, I think it's the speed of innovation, the fact that everybody is on the most current version, and I think one of the more interesting points about everybody being on the most current version is it allows the software vendor to support one release. And I think in the good old days, I spent 20 years implementing ERP, and I'd look at the organization I was with, and a lot of the resources, time and effort, both in country but also at headquarters in development, was really spent pedaling madly to keep old versions versions of software going. And I think that's, if you're on an old version of software, you could look at that and say that's wonderful. But if your entire customer base is sitting on one version of the software, you can redeploy those resources and focus on innovating and making your software better. And I think that's massive, and that's a huge advantage to organizations that are adopting cloud, because I think, the pace of change in business isn't slowing down. The requirements of a business on its enterprise architecture are only getting bigger, and you need software partners or cloud providers that are innovating at the pace that you need, that you can take advantage of, rather than sitting looking in your rear vision mirror, how am I going to keep that software up to date that I implemented 5 years ago? And I think and that's a massive change.
Okay, good stuff. So this next one was to Tony as well, and I think we can probably skip through it because we've touched on both of those points as we've talked through. So next one, and this is chunky, I know, Brendan, and perhaps we've got the wrong guy in the room from Accenture to talk about this, but integration and it all sounds wonderful, right? We join the platform, we take the cloud solutions, everything integrates and plugs in together perfectly. One customer record seamlessly moves across all your marketing automation as well as your CRM and ERP sales, yada yada. We all know that perfection doesn't quite work like that. So how does it work? You're operating in a cloud environment, the rules are set by someone else, you can't get in behind to databases, you can't get to integration that you might want to. What do you do?
Yeah, and I do jokingly tell people I am a WebMethods certified integration architect from many years ago, but it's I've left my architecture days behind me long ago. Look, for me, you're right. I espouse the Leonard Cohen way of thinking, which is there is no perfect offering. So, the perfect API architecture doesn't exist. What I do think is interesting in terms of the maturity of cloud platforms and is that you hear Mark Benioff and Keith Block last week on their analyst call, and they're calling out the importance of integration architecture as the next driver of growth for these platforms. So there is that recognition that yes, cloud is great. Yes, it's easy to support. Yes, there's immediate business value to be unlocked, but it's still, integration is still a challenge. And it still needs these SaaS platforms still need to be integrated with legacy enterprise systems. So we can't avoid the complexity of this topic, and I feel we're going to have a much heavier focus on this area going forward. So Salesforce and others will aggressively work to fill in the gaps. But again, coming back to the idea of the ecosystem and the support network, there are great cloud integration solutions out there to help solve this problem. There are great cloud partners to help solve the problem. There are ISV solutions and other innovations that you can apply, and of course that great open source global user community, the product forums and everything else mean that integration shouldn't be a constraint to moving to cloud. And if you get into that debate, you just have to say, what would Leonard Cohen say? How do I work around this problem and move forward?
Simon, I'm sure you've got a perspective on this one.
Yeah, sure.
Perhaps it is perfect.
Well, nothing's ever perfect. I've been in software for 25 years, and if I said everything was perfect, I should stop talking now.
You'd be a salesman.
Yeah, I would. Look, I think it's interesting. I put this into probably two piles here. I think if you're trying to add capability within a platform, and I'm not talking within one software vendor, I think your integration story is a very different conversation. And I think you should expect, if let's say you're using marketing and sales on a platform and you want to add other components within the same platform, you should expect those pieces of the puzzle to integrate very neatly. You shouldn't be writing code, and you shouldn't be needing to look at APIs. You should expect a single database, and you should expect business processes to flow across different vendors' tools as seamlessly as possible. In fact, you shouldn't know when you're using one vendor's tool versus another if they're in the same platform, it accesses the same database, etc. That is fundamentally different to where we were historically. But I think you talk a little bit about APIs, and I think the reality of any organization is you're not going to necessarily single source every business critical application from one platform. Ideally, you would do as much as possible on one platform, but it's not a reality. That's where APIs come in. I think if you're looking at your various platforms and where you're going to go, I think one of the questions you need to ask yourself is a fairly technical one. Do I really understand the cloud architecture? And I think there are a couple of things that distinguish a good one from one that potentially has just been a recoded on-premise version. And I think do you have a data layer and a metadata layer? And that metadata layer is where you, the client, can make the changes. You can impact how you use the platform. But I think on top of that, you also need to make sure APIs are really embedded in the architecture. Most cloud platforms have that. Most good software, modern software packages have APIs, and they can and should be talking to each other. Just know that when you're integrating using APIs from one platform to another, both platforms have a different upgrade path, timings, etc. And although vendors try to avoid it, there are changes to APIs. So the more APIs you're leveraging to different platforms, the more IT infrastructure you need to have on staff to support, or obviously outsource that to an integration partner. But I think you're adding complexity. You just need to go through that with your eyes open. And I think Brendan was talking before. A software platform has 3 upgrades a year, or if you're in that platform, it's about as perfect as you're ever going to get. But the second you have APIs out to other solutions, you just need to have your eyes open and understand that both of those platforms have different upgrade plans.
Yeah. In my experience, the platforms have come on leaps and bounds in this space over the last 3 to 4 years. So the ability to ingest data from multiple sources and to report on it and to transact on it has improved immensely since the days where
absolutely
and so much so that a current project of ours, we are integrating Salesforce to 12 internal and external business systems, which is a phenomenal effort and a measure of the degree.
And you hesitated to answer this question.
I must admit I'm not coding it myself, but it's a measure of the complexity and the challenges that Salesforce is able to take on in terms of where it is right now.
I think again, Brendan, just to add to what when you're doing a project like that, I'm sort of asking you a question, but for me, one of the fundamental things you need to ask yourself at the outset is, where is the source of the truth?
That's right. Yeah. And in some respects, it's pretty straightforward depending on the industry and the process that you're transacting. In other cases, the debate needs to be had to optimize the data transactions through the flows. But yeah, it's just really encouraging to see cloud platforms playing in this space now of a hardcore integrated enterprise applications.
Yeah, and I guess there's also the cloud-based and integration specialists that are working in this space to solve a point of pain that's evolving and slowly will go away. So they're a new business that's got a sunset. You would hope as cloud matures and pre-built configurations happen and the crowd sourcing happens and the commonly integrated platforms become
absolutely
a triviality. Yeah.
Sorry,
carry on. You carry on.
I was just going to say a really good rule of thumb when you're investigating solutions. If you hear the word synchronize and you're talking about things like customer master records, that's a red flag. Really think about it, because you're adding complexity to the environment.
Yeah, did right. Okay, so we're getting close to the end, guys. So if you've got questions that we haven't answered and you want to get these guys that have been around the traps for a wee while in the cloud space to answer them, then now's your time to get them in. The last one is was kind of giving Simon an opportunity to wrap things up, but I think we've given him a pretty good platform today, given we haven't had Tony's voice to dilute things down. I don't think there's anything you haven't said already, Simon, but if you feel like that there is something missing, because I've got a couple of questions myself, just now's your chance.
Yeah, sure, certainly. Look, I think I've obviously spoken a little bit about this. I don't want to bang on too much, but I think you asked me about Salesforce Financial Force. I think we've talked about it. Fundamentally, from Salesforce's perspective, they sell CRM. The customer is at the center of everything they do, and for us, building financials applications and professional services automation applications on the platform, we have exactly the same philosophy. So the nice thing is every interaction you have between marketing, sales, service, accounting, professional services delivery, and analytics, it's all the same data and all the same record. And I think from an organizational perspective, you can have a dashboard that has marketing content, sales content, project delivery, and outstanding payables all in a single view. And I think if I pivot away from whether it's Financial Force or Salesforce, the important thing is I can run my business with a common view of what my data is, and I can start making decisions with confidence, not worrying about whether somebody's going to come to me tomorrow with a pull from another system with a completely different set of data and then confuse any decisions I'm making. So I think that's fundamental, and I think that's absolutely it's clearly the advantage that I see there.
Mm-hmm. All right, good stuff. So just one of the questions that I had, and you sort of touched on it a little bit earlier, and it sort of just triggered a flag for me, was you sort of saying that a technology-led change initiative is quite a valid process, right? I mean, most often, and I suppose traditionally, you would say organisations should be looking at themselves and saying where do they want to be in their future processes, and then find technology that allows them to get there. It's kind of changed, right? And so what's your experience out talking to customers in different sites and how they're approaching that problem, opportunity?
Sure. Is that to me?
No, Brendan.
Yeah,
I think the common thread that I find in businesses that adopt cloud successfully are a very ambitious outlook for their business and a curiosity. And if you have both of those things and you approach the problem in that light, you can drive some really creative conversations and design thinking. A design thinking methodology just fits with the SaaS and cloud platform so well, because it's all about how might we do different things, how might we become a customer-centric business, and taking that wide-eyed and wide-angled view of the possibility out there. So without getting too salesy or cheesy, we like to talk about the art of the impossible and opening people's minds up to things that they never thought possible in terms of the way they currently do business and the way they engage with customers. So I think that is vital to unlock the potential of your cloud investment.
Okay, Simon, you get your chance.
Sure. Look, I think I don't want to disagree completely with you, Hayden. I think that, yes, technology is important, but I don't think the world has changed that much. When you're going on a change initiative, fundamentally your business needs to have a roadmap and a strategy. It needs to be about what growth markets you're going after, what business model you're using. But what I think has changed is in that mode, you should be considering which technology you're using, not the vendor, but the capability of the technology you require. Because I think where we are today, the ability to innovate and get to a new business model or a new market or a new view of a customer is far superior to what it used to be. So understanding that the technology can take you from A to B much faster than you could, let's say, 5-10 years ago. So that's where I see technology choice is fundamental. But I also think you need to pick a platform and run with it. I think if you have a business strategy and you want to go out there and you want to go after new markets, etc., if you're choosing technology this month and then choosing some other technology next month, and you don't have a systematic view to how it all fits together, you're going to end up at a roadblock very, very quickly. So I think that's why technology needs to be part of the decision, but I don't think technology needs to lead the strategy or where you're going as a business.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, fantastic. Thanks, guys, and lots of good insights there. We've got pretty much to the top of the hour. No more questions coming in, so we'll bring things to a close. A little bit about Financial Force. And Simon, given you're in the audience, you probably talk to this, but maybe I'll take it. You've had enough of a voice.
I have.
So Financial Force, number one cloud ERP on Salesforce, and for you, if you're running Salesforce, and a lot of people are, Financial Force seamlessly connects the whole thing together, as we've heard pretty roundly today. The local operation. Two products, financial management and professional services automation, is what Financial Force offers. 735 employees, 7 offices around the world, but most importantly, one in Sydney that's looking after the Australia and New Zealand environment. 1,300 customers across the globe, 40% year-on-year growth. My numbers aren't matching, so that's interesting. 38%, 48%. What am I talking about here? Grant Thornton in Australia, and Serata, Freedom Property, as well as those are the local customers. Salesforce and HP are big ones globally. Okay, so that's Financial Force. Contact details will come up shortly, but just before we all leave, as you leave, a screen like this will pop up in front of you. We'd really like to hear from you in terms of your impressions of today, ideas for future sessions, and a couple of other questions in there. So I appreciate if you can fill that out. Otherwise, thank you very much for attending. The guys from Financial Force in Sydney will be in touch with you for follow-up, unless you opted out of that. They'll set you up with a demo and do whatever it takes to inform you in your cloud journey. Thanks, guys, very much for your attendance and contribution today, and let's hope Tony improves soon.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Close there.
Thanks,
Cheers,
Adam.
guys.
Cheers.
Thanks, audience. Okay.
Done.